This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
The federal government has threatened to revoke the licenses of underperforming electricity distribution companies, DISCOs. The Minister of Power, Adebayo Adelabu, has expressed concern about the inadequate electricity distribution by DISCOs in the country, despite an increase in the power output that is up to 4,000 megawatts by generating companies, GENCOs. Now, the minister has taken this position, which has been lauded by experts within the sector. However, it does come weeks after revelations that the federal government owes power distribution companies close to 100 billion naira in unpaid debts. To consider what it would look like for the federal government to suspend these licenses or withdraw the licenses, we're joined this morning by energy consultant Dozie Nwoha. Good morning, Mr. Nwoha. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, good morning. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on. And let's start off with the reaction, or rather the statement by the Minister of Power. How possible is it to see a withdrawal of licenses from DISCOs?
I mean, it's very possible because under the recently released Electricity Act for 2023, the regulator, being NERC, does have the powers to withdraw license, dissolve boards for the distribution companies, for every licensee in the entire value chain anyway.
Mr. Nwoha, there is some talk about the DISCOs preferring to supply electricity to industrial companies because they're more likely to get bulk payments versus continue to supply electricity to residential areas because of issues with payment and metering and so on and so forth. Could this be contributing to the underperformance of the DISCOs?
I disagree with that because, yes, the industrial customers do tend to, pay bulk payments and also pay on time. We've just had really poor generation levels for the past couple of months. And not all DISCO networks are even, that optimized to make that sort of diversion. So what's going on here now, to be honest, is really, I'm sure the DISCOs are prioritizing the little energy they're getting, because we're having issues of, transmission line vandalizations and other low generation levels. So it's really just a case of the little that I have, how am I allocating it? But the onus really goes back to poor generation levels. I don't think DISCOs are intentionally trying not to supply residential areas.
Well, Mr. Nwoha, let me take you back a moment. For one, when the Minister of Power made this threat, he did note that there's been increased capacity or supply from the GENCOs themselves, that the failure does seem to come from the DISCOs. So let's explore the reaction you expect from the distribution companies now that this threat is on the table.
Okay, based on the available information I have, looking at daily generation levels for the past 2 months, generation levels are actually lower. So we've always had poor generation levels, but it's always hovered between 4,500 megawatts to 4,000 megawatts. That's typically what we get on an average day. But in recent times, we've been seeing levels closer to 3,000 to 3,500, and on some days really poor and under 3,000. So I'm speaking from available daily data that is being put out by the Transmission Company of Nigeria, and our generation levels are quite poor. It has not improved. So that narrative is a bit skewed because if you go into the numbers, it hasn't improved. We're actually worse off in the past couple of months.
So, Mr. Nwoha, if generation levels according to you are low, why are the DISCOs getting this much heat from the federal government?
So, I think sometimes it's really a case of, how do I put it? So the DISCOs typically distribute power and collect revenues for the entire value chain. So most times, over the years, DISCOs always receive heat because in the past they've been known to reject power. So the way it typically works is, as a DISCO, there's what they call day-ahead nomination. So I would nominate that power should be sent to certain feeders across my network. If there are areas where I know that I have downtimes and I'm probably trying to fix the network, and would not nominate those areas for power to be sent to. And typically what would happen is TCN would send power based on their own network strength, which sometimes would mean sending power to areas the discos cannot take that power. So in the past, what has happened is discos will shut off, that feeder and reject that power basically. So I think we're just really seeing an offset of that, because it's been a practice in the past before the regulators, stepped in and put in strong regulatory penalties for any disco who does this, and also put in strong regulatory penalties for TCN when they do send power to areas where the discos have not nominated. So I really think it's a rub-off, because at the end of the day, the discos can only supply power to the areas, supply power that they receive. So if I'm supposed to receive 600 megawatts and I do receive only 300 megawatts in a day, I will have to prioritize areas I can send power to, because at that point I can't serve everybody. So that's really what's going on.
I'd like us to look ahead, right? Let's imagine that we are in a time where the federal government has advised NERC, and NERC has actually decided to withdraw a license to a disco. What sort of impact do you see that having on the industry? And it's worth noting that this isn't the first time we've heard a potential threat of withdrawing a license from a distributing company.
Okay, so maybe just I don't know to correct that. This is not the first time. We've had notice of intention to cancel license from the regulator multiple times in the past. Maybe they had set some sort of timeline deadline for the discos to meet certain requirements, and they couldn't. So we've had NERC, pretty much issue notice to withdraw license. We've also had NERC recently, I think December 2023, dissolve the board of a disco, Kaduna Electric, and then put it in a regulatory board. But the truth about it is, the issues are still the issues. If we do not address the key issues, which are poor transmission network, weak grid, also even weak distribution lines, poor generation levels, it doesn't really matter who's at the helm of affairs. We're not going to see short-term changes. So you may bring in a new board or a new management after the license has been withdrawn, and they may come up with their own strategies, but the nature of electricity will still take time. We're not going to see changes in the next 1-2 weeks. And the way the sector works, even if the license is withdrawn, it doesn't mean the disco shuts down. We have what they call business continuity regulations, which means that regardless of the license being withdrawn or the board being dissolved, supply has to continue to be put out. So that once that happens, the business continuity kicks in to ensure that we have certain level of normalcy in the operations of the disco.
Okay.
So revoking that license does not have any short-term effect in terms of us seeing improved supply, because the issues are still the issues.
All right. Well, Mr. Nwoha, thank you very much for speaking with us this morning. Our guest on the conversation, Dozie Nwoha, is an energy consultant. He joined us to speak on the threat by the federal government to revoke the licenses of underperforming distribution companies, or discos, in the country. Stay with us. The conversation continues on Now Breakfast.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.